Let me go ahead and recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Lieu, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chair Bearer, for holding this important hearing. My first question goes to Dr. Adalja. I saw that in your biography, you previously worked on the anthrax issue. I note that I was vaccinated for anthrax when I served on active duty in the military. I served overseas. And my question to you is about vaccines. Would you agree with me that vaccines are one of the best ways to mitigate pandemics?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Yes, I think when it comes to any infectious disease, prevention is always better than treatment, especially if you have a safe and effective vaccine. So vaccines have to be a cornerstone of our medical countermeasure policy, because that's what takes a threat off the table. That's what reduces severity from illness. And that ultimately is what we have to aim for by looking at what's out there in the threatscape that we know can cause infection and starting to work towards vaccines, even if it may not be the exact vaccines that's used during an epidemic or a pandemic. Making those steps down the road will get us much faster response. The work that people did on the first SARS and Middle East Respiratory Syndrome, MERS, made it much easier to develop a vaccine for SARS-CoV-2 because they already knew, for example, that the spike protein was an important target for immunity. So yes, vaccines are always going to be one of the cornerstones for medical countermeasures.
And it also turns out that our immune system is pretty smart. So when we put vaccines in and train our immune system, even when there are variants, our immune system still sort of figures it out that, oh, maybe this is something we need to take care of. So while the vaccines may not be 100% effective, they're still somewhat effective in making your immune system better against even variants. Isn't that correct?
Right. If you have an effective vaccine, it's very hard for a variant or a mutation to erase all the protection a vaccine gives you. Vaccines are not all or none. It's not an on or off switch. It's a spectrum of protection. So even if a vaccine may allow you to get infected, other arms of the immune system, other than the antibodies, may protect you against the severe consequences. So even when you have a vaccine that's not 100%, that's not a magic bug zapper, you still get benefits from them, and they are beneficial. This underscores what we do with the influenza vaccine every year. We know it's much more protective against severe disease than it is protection against mild disease, and that's also true for the COVID-19 vaccines.
Thank you. Questions for Dr. Esvelt. You said something interesting about combining phase 1 and phase 2 trials. Can you explain the difference between phase 1 and phase 2 trials for vaccine development?
Thank you, Representative. Yes, a phase 1 trial normally seeks to establish the safe dosage and doesn't try to figure out whether or not a vaccine actually is effective against a given pathogen. Phase 2 is when we give it to enough people, some of whom we know will become infected, that we will be able to tell how effective the vaccine actually is. So when I suggest combining phase 1 and phase 2, if there is a pandemic that is very high lethality, much higher than SARS-2, then in all likelihood, we would want to get shots into arms sooner rather than later, if necessary, trying multiple different doses of the same vaccine in different cohorts. Honestly, if we're serious about it, we would actually run challenge trials in which we take volunteer cohorts, guarantee them the best medical care, and deliberately infect them, some of whom would have been vaccinated with different vaccines in different amounts.
In a high lethality pandemic, would the FDA have the authority to do this, or there needs to be a change to a law for them to combine the trials and speed things up?
That is an excellent question. I'm afraid I do not know. I suspect Dr. Adalja may know.
Does anyone on the panel know?
If I could answer, I do think that this is something that that's in the public health authority laws of the FDA. I don't know that for sure, but I do think there has been a lot of discussion about running phase 1 and phase 2 simultaneously. And I think there's not any obstacle to doing so. And it would be necessary during a pandemic to get the vaccine as quickly as possible to meet these 100-day goals that we hear talked about.
Thank you. And now let me speak to my Republican colleagues across the aisle. We need your help to counter vaccine disinformation. As you've just heard, vaccines are one of the most effective ways to mitigate a pandemic. And yet we have lots of folks believing that these vaccines have microchips in them, or that they cause autism, or that they're going to give you COVID or other crazy things. And all of that is false. And so we simply need Republican colleagues to step up. And when they go on Fox News, just push back on the hosts who are saying crazy stuff about these vaccines, because that's how we can beat this pandemic by getting as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible. With that, I yield back.
Great.